conspicuous. Two teas if anybody wants to try either.
Yeah, wonderful.
They're both whites, but this is actually a black cultivar that's processed with white. It's a very strange, almost, it reminds me almost of turpentine or something like that.
Huh.
I feel black is processed with white.
Mm-hmm. It's not a white that's processed with black?
No, it's strange.
So I thought that white was a stage of the leaf as opposed to a processing.
I think, as far as I understand, there are certain cultivars that are used for different teas, and then, yeah, I suppose with, I mean, I'm not entirely sure because I guess traditionally it seems like things were a little, and then for example, this other one is white, but it's a bud and a leaf or a bud and two leaves, something like that, which I think typically would not have been included.
Right. Yeah.
As you know, as a white tea. So
Yeah.
I'm not totally sure, but there seems to be some shifting of
definitions. Yeah, I think there's
experimentation.
Just as it, in the same way that the language is inherently metaphorical and kind of multivalent. Also, the meanings are sort of cultural meaning patterns are have soft edges in a similar way. So like you say white pu'er, and it doesn't make any logical sense, but what they mean is, what they sometimes mean, and they argue about whether it's okay to talk about it this way and stuff. It's just a largely pressed, but interesting to see.
It's hard to know what's faddishness as well.
It's true. It's hard to.
I think there's a certain amount of coining new names or descriptions that perhaps don't depart greatly from things that people have been drinking for longer, or just subtle differentiations.
But then I guess beginning to attune yourself to the types, having these sort of in-betweens might be quite an interesting way of seeing if you can discern the similar and the different qualities.
And what have you discovered so far as far as volume on it?
That John says I'm too stingy.
I think I quite said it like that.
Well, so what I was looking for is more like does the tea give a lot?
I think we've only had that one maybe twice.
Okay.
I find it gives a lot just because I'm sort of between finding the flavor intriguing and off-putting. I'm not really selling it.
No, it sounded like to me. I think that's interesting. I mean, in a sense, it's true. I don't hear anybody there. I don't know if you have yourselves muted or you're just not talking, but
just not talking.
Just not talking.
So you're not here with us having the tea conversation.
So it's a little distorted, so
Is
it's
it
hard
okay?
to follow. A little bit. Mhm.
At least,
Frozen at the moment for me. Oh, there
okay.
it goes.
No major disconnect, I think, today. So that's a 1,000% improvement over last week.
It was good during the practice.
Oh, good.
Just started right after you finished.
Okay.
Pretty distorted.
Any reflections, observations on today's practice or practices on your own in between when we've anytime, but including in between when we saw each other last?
I don't know if it was the energy of the day or what changes kind of led to this feeling, but in particular, after you said that you mentioned retaining a feeling of inhaling even after the inhale has stopped, I found that the holding of the breath became much more comfortable and a lot less forced. And that a real sort of change of sensation started kind of inhabiting that phase.
Great. Today.
Yeah. Yeah. Whereas last week, it felt really forceful.
Mm-hmm.
So it's quite a distinct change.
Yeah. The practice did, or the breath holding?
The breath holding,
yeah,
in a way that was distracting last week.
Yeah, got it. Yeah.
And that developed a lot of tension, I think. And I've been sort of revisiting that during the practice in the week, and just sort of feeling that and feeling where the breath is being held and where the tension is developing. But it was quite a quick shift today.
Great. Yeah, that difference is big. We use a pressurized breath occasionally in particular circumstances. I think we've done together, but it's usually or especially keeping it low and inside. And so when you're clamping down the breath, but also expanding up top, you can get a lot of junk up there.
There's already a lot of junk up there. It's just adding more.
Totally.
I also felt something akin to that expansion. When you mentioned that today, I did really feel it, like, expanding in my body, in my arms. So the breath was really encapsulated in my body. So it wasn't really kind of holding. But I also felt today, which I also kind of had a little bit of a little new breakthrough or something, where I felt the center of my body right there, just a really big fullness that I don't know, I think I noticed other times. I guess I was, maybe it's accumulative, I don't know. But just there was a kind of fullness that is radiant. It's really, and it kind of helped with not having anything in my head, not that that's a regular struggle or anything. It's just interesting. Like my head has nothing to do with it. It's just this amazing swirl kind of energy. you know, literally like a big circle. So anyway, I'm still feeling it, and it feels wonderful. I kind of I don't know, maybe some things coming together.
Great. Yeah, sometimes it's accumulative, and sometimes, you know, and at the same time, things coming together. Sometimes it's in the day, and we're giving ourselves the opportunity. To feel it, to be open to it.
Makes sense.
Usually, all those things. So we're today in practice, we were sounding everything out loud, and that's good and beneficial in ways that we often talk about getting the feel for the vibrations, so that you can activate or rest in that same resonance when you're doing it silently. So it's useful to keep in mind that sounding out loud is in maybe obvious ways, but useful to remind yourself it's coarse and strong. And so sometimes that's useful. If you're angry and you want to release that anger, you can, separate from practice, or if it happens to correspond with practice, but anytime, you can use shu, east, liver, associated with anger and compassion and the positive, or kindness, or vitality. So if you're looking to dispel a kind of present urgent anger, you can use it out loud. You can use it loud. You know, you can meet the energy of your feeling. But if you're not in a scenario like that, it can drain more than just letting go of what we want to let go of. And so that's the reason that the kind of default practice is silently sounding these sounds. But we should have the tools to navigate that as we need it, so that, you know, on the outside, a week or 2 or 3 or 7 of sounding out loud can be good and supportive, and then making your way with the more subtle sound. Or really, I hope that each of you can navigate that yourselves by paying attention to your own needs, and you may begin a practice sounding out loud. It doesn't have to be the same for each element. You might begin with sounding, and then find you've settled and are feeling more subtle, and you can follow that. All the way, I think we mentioned in response to a question of Zephyr's last week, all the way to a fully internal, no external form sound practice is the other end of the spectrum. So, and then perhaps even beyond that, as we learn to simply rest in what is, and what is transforming in these ways, then it's happening. And so in the morning, as we rest in meditation, we're in the east green spring part of this practice of settling into the self-harmonization of the cycles. And if we're at the stage of practice where we're sustaining this over days and months, then you're participating in the cycle of the day, or participating in the cycle of the year. And this harmonization is simply happening. So that, I hope, is a useful perspective. And this will be strong tea.
We'll see if there's a strong aversion or.
It looks nice.
It's interesting you said all that. I was feeling actually quite weak because I was not well. Had some lingering cold that I can't seem to shake. But the practice and even the sounding actually felt energizing, or maybe it was dispelling whatever was stuck. But I was feeling weak actually before we started. So I thought that this would be hard for me, but it actually did the opposite. And I felt like inhaling the colors really did it. And I think the sound sort of, I don't know, maybe just moved stuff, which I could kind of see how the sound could drain you. But instead, I think it moved things that were maybe stuck, you know, when you're like ill, something maybe stuck somewhere.
Yeah.
So that kind of what I went through, but it was it gave me something big time.
Yeah, that's great. So the resonance, the vibration, it's useful to remember, is shaking, like, right? So it's shaking loose so that things can move. And so
and the color was like the color and the breathing and the colors, that such an incredible complement of the two, I have to say.
Yeah. Great.
I think I had the inverse experience to that, which was a feeling like, and I think partly because of the stillness that settled in with the breath at a certain point, but a feeling almost of crossing a threshold with generating sound in a way that felt like a bit of a push after having kind of settled in to breath.
And so the sounding broke what was
right, or it
more subtle.
Right, or it really felt like it required an effort to actually be the source, feel like the source of the sound that was emanating.
Oh, okay.
In some way.
I see.
Yeah. I don't know if that was it. It was not necessarily sort of negative in a sense. It was interesting to observe, but it definitely felt like it was somewhat out of step.
Yeah.
With my feeling of the practice today.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, group practice, there's some push and pull and guided instruction and stuff like that. But so it's precisely that, of course, that I'm suggesting we all follow in each of our practice. So the practice session.
I think I have an intuitive sense of it, but I'm just curious, going back to your example of working with some quality associated with wood, potentially instances where you might use a sort of complementary element if you're having something that's in the wood, you know, within the element of wood, why you might, or how you might utilize metal
Use
in
different
relation to that
elements.
or something.
Yeah.
Like almost like with like, or contrasting
Yeah.
in a sort of complementary way.
Usually it's most direct to just use
With this, okay.
So, but a way that you can, one way that you might experiment with the idea, which is, it's a good idea and a good use of the understanding, the phases, elements, energies, is, for example, if it's, if it's a condition of excess, like anger, then using the element that controls that element, like metal controls wood, can have a good effect. But one of the reasons we do it all every time, to the extent that that's possible, and with special exceptions like I mentioned earlier, is that diagnosis of a particular imbalance is almost always wrong. And so even, among Chinese medicine doctors or people who are focused on this. And so treating, so even if your symptom is clearly in the wood category, the fire will consume it. The earth will bring it back down. It will integrate it. The metal will cut it off at its root, and the water will nourish the next growth. And so on the one hand, if you're angry, shoo can bring you back when you need it. On the other hand, the whole cycle is especially beneficial.
Okay. Yeah, it was less in the sense of problem solving so much as the strong resonance that there is between some of those.
Yeah. So say more about that. I mean, it's useful.
I think it's coming out of what you're saying, but probably how I framed the question.
So,
Do you would you ever I understand doing all the directions, doing all the elements, would you ever is anything like doing a certain direction to counteract another direction, like doing a practice where you try to deal with the axis of one, and then is there like a practice where you would go to another to help that access or something like that?
usually we would give particular focus to the element itself that needs support. And then, so if it's anger or anxiety, anxiety is more complicated. I have it here with wood. So let's say anger is so clear, we can just stick with that. So, or depression is also yin wood. And so something like that, we identify it as wood, and then in our practice, we focus on it by either sounding it out loud or doing additional repetition. So instead of 3, we might do 6, or we might do as many, but no more than 36. And then do 3 or 6 or whatever your current practice intention is of the rest of them. And so, so not so much
counterbalance, but
yeah, not you wouldn't necessarily do 36 north water repetitions in order to support wood. You could see how it goes, but the usual practice is to do the additional repetitions with the element in question, and then.
So it's kind of like embodying that one to a point where you're. Yes, it feels like all of this is always the opposite of Western thinking. I mean, but yes, I maybe I'm wrong in saying that, but yes, I see that you're kind of harmonizing by being in it more. And yes, I understand what you're saying. Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, it just takes more work. Like just in the experience that we've all had so far since starting this class, I think you will have noticed that in some of the directions or elements, if there's any, whether it's kind of free and clear and smooth sailing, or whether you have a particular challenge, often your breath is harder to hold if it's a problematic element, or it's harder to focus, harder to establish the associations and internal environment. And so in those cases, it's a challenge, and so it takes more iterations to get to the same place that you maybe get easily with one of the other elements.
Right. Very logical. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. So you can begin to see the pattern of using inhale mantras. I don't expect that you suddenly try to integrate those, but you see how that is articulating with your inhale. And the words, whether sounded out loud or internally, activate those resonances of all of these things that we're focusing on with our minds. So the pattern, that will be silent in the end, and so there will be no interruption of your inhale and exhale of the practice. So it's just happening as you inhale. And again, to reiterate, it's effectively what's happening when we simply inhale, breathe.
Oh, I see. That's what you were doing.
That's what I was doing.
Cool.
And it happens in a gradual way throughout the entire inhale, in the same way as through the exhale.
Yeah, and you can repeat it as you hold.
When I heard you refer to inhale mantras last week, I thought it was something like you would go
True backward.
well, just inhale, like inhale or right. So I was thinking, oh, this is really going to be something.
That's logical. If you can think of a different way to express it, I'm happy.
glad to report that all is well at the well.
Oh, good.
Things are coming back together. So sorry to miss the first part.
No, thank you.
You didn't find anyone taking extravagant baths or everyone, all of the bathtubs in the house
There were
full.
people lined up all the way up our road.
You've been talking about the well too much. There was a question that came up when we were speaking about the conversation last week, which was that you mentioned a relation of the heavenly stems to, I couldn't remember if you said constellations or if you said planets or both things.
Both.
Okay.
And this is what I'm about to say is the case with a lot of Chinese cultural knowledge. So to a certain extent, it's neither known nor inquired after the source of that of the stems are. It's used and it works. But in Master Wu's book and in my understanding, which I think he doesn't say, but perhaps because it's not established, but also in any case, my feeling is that where the branches articulate patterns in, for example, the months throughout the year, month being Luna, moon, and it articulates where the moon is at midnight during those phases, and it moves through in a particular, like over a season, over 3 months, that location will move through the houses, the constellations in the eastern part of the sky, where the location of the moon at midnight. And so I think the stems are a sun cycle with those same reference points, the location of the sun with respect to these constellation houses. But that's at least partly speculation.
Just to reiterate, I don't have too many questions practice-wise because it's this repeated infusion, week after week. But a lot of this for me is coming back to sort of like this orientation towards what is these cycles just are there, and part of that is trying to connect that with the understanding of what the elements are themselves. I feel like that's what one's moving towards. But you said the stems and branches are both post-celestial,
Right.
referring to the post heaven.
Yeah. Because all existence
Condition
is post coming into being.
Right.
So,
I guess one thing I'm coming back around is the degree to which the elements are seen as being ways of personifying or figuring yin-yang oscillation, that movement. the distinct way, like just beginning to get a sense of the distinct ways in which they're both emanation, they're both forms that original chi takes in some way.
So I don't know if this will be aimed accurately enough at that, but so one way to maybe find your way into that is, you know, the larger pattern of a year cycle, for example, will be initiation, you know, the hexagram is fu, the return, the single yang line at the bottom, and growth until full yang at solstice. But within that growth, we see clear rising and falling. And so the initial yang phase has the character of in like a lion, out like a lamb. It charges through to break through, to break out of storage of winter, and then it's gentle. And so, so we're articulating that rise and fall within this general rise. And then summer starts gently with its yin and culminates with strong, radiant, hot brightness, and so on. But so you see that peak and valley within this larger peak and valley, and that will be true in each of those peaks and valleys, all the way down to 10-minute cycles within an hour, within 2 hours. Is that
no, that helps definitely.
To your question?
Yeah, just trying not to collapse them as being one version of the same thing, but that really helps to see where you might yin-yang movement of the year might then be distinguished or characterized in a really useful way.
I mean, in a way, it's like the mystery beyond the mystery, right? So within any moment that we're articulating as yin and yang, we're naming it. There's one that surrounds it, and there's one inside it. You know.
When you said that this day has a particular energy, I wondered if that's something that you can speak to more, or if it's not speakable.
Well, I notice it, or I make note of it most clearly when I'm teaching, because when I teach, there's sort of a outside-inside loop happening with where you all are, where the sort of weather is, and where I am internally. And so, I mean, really, it's happening in practice each day for all of us. You notice it's different, and sometimes it's you, kind of, sometimes it's the environment, kind of, and sometimes we see those as identical. But so some days have a clearer kind of more nameable distinction, just in my personal relationship to it. Today was one of those days. It felt like this lifting, soft, cutting through. It wasn't that blast open brightness of yesterday, but it has some of that aliveness. And so as I'm in this cycle of being still, but letting things come through me, informed by what's in front of me, I feel that very clearly. So that's kind of what I was responding to.
You know, Ian, I I mean, some things I feel like the more I do this, the more I feel like I shouldn't say anything, because there's something about the participation that's so profound that actually saying it feels sacrilegious. So I'm always in this weird place about the excitement of wanting to say it, but then I don't know why I need to. But you know, it's interesting because when I asked you that one question, you said you had mentioned that in your practice, but I didn't get a chance to see the practice yet. So I have, you know, I many times feel that I'm, you know, the way this all started, I feel that I'm connected, we're all connected in this way. It's interesting because of the day discussion, is that I often feel I am on, my heart's beating talking about this. I'm on this journey that whether I'm downloading it from you and you're downloading it or whatever, but I do definitely you know, have those experiences are very different than when I'm alone. So I know that also when I'm alone, I know that I'm still connected to that, and that's a lot of where it's coming from. Like you said, it's like the feeding from the outside coming in, you know, like the so I you know, it's interesting that I had asked you that question and you had talked about it, but I had not seen the video. And I said, of course, you know, of course, we're all processing. And anyway, I think it's beautiful, but sorry, just meandering and kind of trying to not say too much while I already said too much about all that wonderful, mysterious stuff that is so clear, and yet I don't know, difficult to, I don't know, I feel like I'm already sharing it with all of you, and I'm thankful. Anyway, I'm going to stop right there.
Well, so for what it's worth, you know, I think there's value in articulating it, because, you know, we all have the opportunity to recognize that in ourselves, and even the different way that you might put words to it will inform the way we put words to it, internally or externally. So I think we should, you know, say what it occurs to us to say in these meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
The resonance of, or the I guess this word synchronicity is right, but like it might just be picking up on it, it might be attuning with these practices, but certainly over the last year, in the context of work with such a concentrated group of people who are working outdoors a lot, so there's some degree of this happening involuntarily anyway, but within a week or a day, hearing the same people presenting the same situation that they're in, I'm stuck, I can't break through this, or a kind of feeling of revelation or epiphany, that you see 3 or 4 people say that within the same day or week, or people struggling in the same way, or this hold and release happening through everybody is increasingly not surprising, but also just being receptive and observing and picking up on it. Even just the sort of, you know, naming something beautiful, giving rise to ugliness, like coming in on a cold, damp, wet day, being judged as bad, being judged as a negative thing rather than something that you're just preparing for. That sort of pattern becomes very interesting, that you, or somebody who's predisposed towards doing very, very physical work as opposed to very, very detail-oriented work, and how that fits with how they look at things and the kinds of things they end up doing as work, or finding fulfillment in. It just reminds me of things you've said previously about the pattern being nested within the pattern in that way. And I hear that a little bit in what Slava's saying, that there are days when it's just undeniable that it's everyone's in it and you're in the day as much as in the practice. And but in all kinds of ways, both, not that it's positive and negative, both through this kind of shared intentional cultivation, but also through being moved by the cycles or by the struggles of life or whatever.
I mean, I find it enjoyable and useful to notice those patterns as the day begins, and then know to expect them the rest of the day, right? And so if there's complexity and entanglement before August gets to school, there's going to be complexity and entanglement, you know, that I should watch out for in traffic. And we have August likes to be first at school, so he likes to be first to arrive. And away, you shake it. And so we have a thing about beating the bus kids, right? So because the bus to arrive after the August kid. And, but every day, for as long as we've been noticing, if we're late, so is the bus. And if we're early, so is the bus. So,
But are you still first?
Wow.
We're always first.
Okay.
Mostly, that was always.
Yeah, no, I mean, I say that to play into the joke.
Yeah.
But we have been not first a couple of times.
Don't talk about
Bad days.
One way that I sort of started to attune more to patterns over the course of the last several years was in particular to patterns in the landscape, and to a sense of trying to work from both the kind of theoretical formation and that is sort of an important part of my background, but also the intuitive sense of place that I was experiencing in certain circumstances, in a way that maybe is not reconcilable. You know, reading logical or visual patterns in the landscape. I'm not sure, you know, I haven't arrived at a place where those inform each other in any kind of useful way. But one thing that has been emerging for me with the practice is very distinct visual images of places. And I don't know if it's useful or worthwhile to linger in those as part of the practice and as a feeling out of why they're emerging and of what their associations might be. but just very, very clear images of places in particular.
Yeah.
That often have been moments where I've had certain feelings of expansiveness and of sort of intuitive connection with something that then informed my sense that I wanted to learn about patterns from a book. Or that was sort of the way of taking that experience and then attempting to, not the only way, but one of the ways of expounding that in some way.
Yeah, so I think what I'll say is won't be surprising to you. That so the of course we don't want to engage in analysis or kind of a cognitive wandering in that image that arises. But on the other hand, especially if it's an image that is directly in alignment with the kind of correlations that we're articulating here, I would put it to work. I would use it. I would just use it as the place, the way that I conjure up all of those. Like, I haven't been using it recently myself, but I used to always use this particular summit experience on the Grand Teton in Wyoming for the West Association, because it's snow, it's sky, it's distance. And it was just, it's a, when you integrate your own experiences, it's this visceral calling up of that. That's why I always use the seasonal moments, because to me they stand out that morning when suddenly it's autumn and you walk out and the air is like cuts. And that carries autumn for me. And so it's very easy to just call it up. And so that's true of more complex environments too, where like being at the top of this mountain, the air is that same kind of crisp, high altitude air. It hurts the lungs a little bit, which is interesting. And that distance and the whiteness, visually the air at altitude is also cleaner, clearer, sharper. And so all of that, I fill up with all of that while facing west. You know. So if so, otherwise things coming up visually or experientially, either memories or imagined or futures. The basic approach you can always know is the right approach is to let it be.
For me, these were very distinctly associated with that, like called forth from the specific moment in the practice and the element.
That was my.
Similarly, also a sort of alpine moment in the Pollino in Italy, which was sort of clarified almost by its appearing contemporaneously with that moment in the practice.
I'm really happy to hear that. Like I said, I still feel like I have this feeling of sacredness that I'm always feel like I go into a non-visible kind of sweat to want to talk about, even like what you've expressed in my own different ways. And so it's interesting. I'm even curious how our experiences in the people that are involved here, and if we were, just in you talking about that, I wonder in what I'm experiencing sometimes before certain things happen. You know, how that all is also working in our circle. But anyway, I think you were saying that just encourages me sometimes to express things that I keep inside and feel like I don't want to sound strange in saying, because I actually experience a lot of things in images and colors and the way my my mind works. And sometimes I think I write things really oddly and express them oddly. But anyway, just want to say thanks for expressing that. That was good to hear.
It feels like expressing things in an odd way is appropriate to the practice. For me.
I definitely, it feels productive in as much as we all can kind of trust the situation and each other sufficiently to let all of these things emerge and take shape and be expressed. As we all discover repeatedly, it's always productive for all of us. Yeah. So
I think there's a certain amount of self-selection involved in this too, because I think odd people are drawn to this practice. So, and also tend to notice odd things. So one way or the other, it's
You should put that on your next poster.
yeah, I did.
Testimonial.
I was saying to someone who has been meaning to come for a long time, hasn't quite made it, that I don't think I said quite motley crew or something like that, but I said that, you know, she would feel she would fit right in. I should have said feel at home, but her response, of course, was, "Why would I want to do that?"
in saying all of that, I just sometimes even feel like what some people call poetic or a metaphor, or I kind of find it to be the opposite. I find what we're reading to be actually straightforward and direct information, and it's also kind of like it just depends on like what kind of thinking you come from. To me, things are not they're not, I mean, okay, from a certain kind of thinking they're symbolic, but to me they're really actually pointing out really direct things that are maybe unseen, if we in the ways that we kind of live blindly, I think, in today's world. So that's another aspect of all of this to me that's like, oh, okay, I'm not such an oddball, because this is actually more of the kind of a direct language. When I was speaking to other people, I would be from colors to, what are called metaphors, I thought were just, a different kind of experience that is very direct. But to most people, it's not. Anyway, I mean, it's not, I'm not sure I expressed that well, but a lot of it to me feels very fundamentally direct. I mean, in the sense that it's at a very core base of what could be called fundamental. I don't even know if that makes sense, but anyway.
Yeah, well, I think that difference in the mode of communication that this particular tradition carries is, responsible for what resonates so clearly with me about it, but is its strength at pointing to the truth, both the root source and the branches and leaves. And so, on the one hand, the vessel of a metaphor can, it contains all of these possible meanings, not as alternative meanings, but as simultaneous meanings. And it also contains the source of those meanings. And so that's the strength of the whole tradition, in my view. And also in each of these iterations of the practice, in each part of the practice.
Right, and I think I just view metaphors as a wholesomeness. I think that's kind of what I'm trying to say, that like something contains all of these possibilities, that it's really a container of something that feels very direct, so like what you said, it could be all these possibilities if we wanted to parse it into all of these possibilities, but it just feels like the metaphor just feels like a container of all of those things that feels very direct. I think that's what I was trying to say. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah.
And that's why I like it.
Yeah. So, in the details of these particular stems, today is the day to look more directly at Wu and Ji. Here with 1 minute to go in class. Yang and Yin, Earth. Earth is 2. Wu, Ji, 2. Often when we articulate these things, we'll say Wu 2, Ji 2, meaning, this stem, Earth. We just say Jia Yi Mu. We say Yi Mu, Jia Mu. As a way of articulating these things. And so sometimes yellow phoenix, sometimes yellow dragon. Huang is yellow and Feng is phoenix. But Jia Yi Bing Ding Wu Ji, the earth phase coming after the fire phase. So that seasonally, it represents all seasons, or especially the third month of each season. And sometimes, especially the last 18 days of the season, which, if you do a little math with 95, I might come up with 5 being Earth, might come up with an answer there. So the feeling of the yang of Wu, Earth, is dense and dry and thick. So dense like rock would be included. To me, that's a easy way to keep them separate in my mind. Rock being yang, earth, or cliff, or mountain, and fertile soil being yin, earth, moist and damp, nurturing, nourishing, humble, low down, faithful in the sense of persisting. Yang in person might express, young earth might express his stability, focus, maturity. This is kind of an integration of experience there. Or stubborn or single-minded, if that earth is excess or deficient. Maybe you can feel in your mind how the stubbornness that excess young earth might yield could be different than the stubbornness that deficient young earth might yield, in the sense that excess might be like the bull, the ox, charging forward, and deficient might be a kind of insistence on a similar feeling, but it lacks the strength. So, but there's a kind of I'm falling and I'm failing, and I'm thus all the more insistent that this is the way. Yin, earth, Ji, earth, Wu, Ji, yang, yin. The person, yin, might be remarkable. I haven't tried to kind of make sense of remarkable so much. Most of these are from Master Wu's book, and their traditional associations. I'm not sure about remarkable, making sense of it with my own constellations, but faithful, this low persistence, not go anywhere, nowhere to go. Contemplative has that same stillness, reflectiveness. Peaceful at that low place, the valley is protected. Also virtuous in the, especially in the sense of honesty, but generally in the sense of maintaining integrity. Anxious, excess and deficient manifestation. So yang is stomach, yin spleen. Yang is rib cage and face. Yin is pancreas, belly, nose, flesh. The structure of the center in the yang, and you can see, and also self, face, identity of the self. But also, so the structure in the yang and the belly, the flesh, the spleen and stomach, hold that which holds moisture and carries moisture and nourishes.
Do you make a distinction between flesh and skin? Looking at,
I think so. Flesh. I think the intention is flesh is kind of includes the muscle, the fleshiness, as opposed to the surface. In the trigrams, it's yang is Gun Mountain, one yang on top, two yin below. and yin is in earth. All open lines. We can reflect on these and integrate them in a feeling of that direction and energy during our practice. Questions or observations?
It's a lot to assimilate.
Yeah. There's no rush. You know, there's still stuff here that I haven't focused on or I've forgotten about or things like that, but still like remarkable that I haven't made sense of intuitively, logically.
I think of that as sort of like noteworthy, that in that sort of sense.
Yeah.
Would make sense to me if that fits.
I think that's the right way to see it. How does it connect for you to yin or in the sense of how do we make the qualities of being noteworthy nestle into the qualities of being nourishing, damp, fertile?
Yeah, I don't know. That's I hadn't thought of that because I hadn't thought of that.
I also find the seasonal associations most apparent, but also the qualities of the elements more tangible than the color, say. Mm-hmm. So associations with each of them, but there's so many scales of kind of especially I know it's not the one we're focusing on, but with metals, quality of contraction and conductivity and the capacity to be extremely sharp. And so there are human usages that seem like they make sense there, but there's also the actual inherent energy of each element. And it's just an observation.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm thinking, sort of projecting about remarkable, is that the other attributes or the other qualities of that attribute, if the attribute is human qualities, then the ways that it gets expressed are all sort of passive. And that seems to be saying, well, wait a minute, just because of that sort of yin flavor, that doesn't mean that you couldn't be outstanding,
right,
in some way.
Right.
And there's something that echoes from like a Talmudic thing about a remarkable woman, or it's like, because the traditional role was, all the yin roles in a family structure,
right.
But a woman of virtue or something like that is outstanding remarkable in that way.
Mhm.
So I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
just casting
I
around
think
for
that helps. Yeah.
connotations. They're
Yeah.
all English connotations. So.
Yeah.
Do you look at you were talking about various things being taken as a part of the whole context as opposed to alternatives. Earlier today you mentioned that, and so then I'm thinking of looking at all the descriptors here as connotations of a word would be used, that they're all present all the time when you articulate things. So all the connotations are always, part of the cultural wrapper.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily have to pick one as opposed to a denotation where you have a specific, more specific application of the language.
Yeah. So yes, is the simple response, and I would also say for purposes of reflecting and noticing that sort of that container, what that container can hold. I see a lot watching August, but watching ourselves in a state of excess joy. It's not just that excess sadness will follow, which it will, but that the sadness is in that excess joy. Like that, it's there. It can rise up because it's pressing against the sadness, and that flipping to where sadness is what's manifest, is like a oblong ball and egg flipping in the water. It's just the same. It can bobble to the other orientation with the slightest touch. And so maybe that's helpful in kind of feeling how inspiring holds delusion. Inspiration holds delusion as its counterpoint, but inclusive.
I think the Brazilians have the word saudade, which is, it actually, it's perceived as sadness and unhappiness. And so, I didn't hear some things you said, so I might be jumping in kind of because of the transmission, but I just know that other cultures definitely have words. Even in Serbo-Croatian, we have some words that embed the opposite feelings in one.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a different state of feeling, actually.
To hold them together, you mean?
To have you're kind of like the way those seasons are explained. It's interesting that you brought that up. Yeah, you do hold both, and it. I mean, there's me. I mean, I'm trying to think of like the Brazilian music that has that. That you would say that. What's her name? No, it's not Cesaria Evora, but I guess you would have some of Cesaria Evora's music could hold some saudade which is the happy sadness. But I think it's hard to explain. I know also in Serbian we have these words that hold several of these things together, and it's this feeling. And so it's like you have to say too much, but it's really just this feeling of neither but both.
Yeah.
Would you take observing if that kind of fluctuation or inversion happens during the practice? Would you take that as an indication of, and if it happens sort of at a distinct moment in the practice, as an indication that it's worth putting more attention on that particular sort of element, in the way that you were describing at the beginning of the practice of doing more repetitions or sort of counterbalancing it in a way?
So it definitely can be. Yeah, could also be cumulative either in that practice or in all of your practices. That some sort of flipping like that can happen. And I would say the goal is not to flip it back so much, but of course to hold them both. And so when you may find that if you repeat the form and that orientation, that some number of iterations down the way, it's not the thing it flips from, not the thing it flipped to, but it's that container of both. So I think it is a good indication to focus, but also, depending on the amplitude of that experience, I could also just not worry about it. Because to diagnose and prescribe to yourself during practice can take you out of deeper feeling.
It's like playing music.
Yeah.
You get it, into like a really nice, like you're in the stream kind of. And the minute you start looking at it and thinking, oh, I'm in the stream, you're suddenly not in the stream.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
This is a distinctive position of Earth, less as the kind of generation or controlling cycles that it's placed in the center, both within alchemy and in these sort of slightly different.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really, there's obviously the fire-water pairing and the metal-wood pairing as being these conjoining, the conjoining of those two is emphasized, but then it's not so much the case. There's something distinctive about this element being used as the center. But
does that seem odd to you that that in that cosmology, water isn't in the center as opposed to Earth?
What would make water central?
Just sort of like, I think of water as kind of like the source of everything, and everything, life comes from water, and we have water in our great sea, and all those kinds of images. And,
So to be initial is different than being central, right? And none are more important than the others. It's just dynamics.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the earth is the place from which wood rises up, fire blazes, and returns. It's the place that metal, gives birth to metal deep inside it, but it's as if metal's entering deep into it. And it's what holds water.
It's quite remarkable in those ways. I mean, in relation to that. In a very subtle, sustaining way.
Yeah.
I need to return to water soon. Are we,
Yeah, I think we should wrap for overtime for sure. Thank you.
How full is your pond? I'm sorry, pond. How's your stream down there, Ian?
It's great. I went in a couple of days ago. And it's frigid.
Great.
Refreshing, as they say.
It's running strong.
It is, yeah, it's quite strong.
Yes, I was wondering. Yeah.
Yeah, quite strong still. And I think will continue to be for, another month or two. So.
Had you said that this spring might be a dry one? I can't remember if that was
windy.
windy.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And warm, which is what the Neijing says. I wouldn't call this warm except in, in
Comparative.
swings. But yeah, that should be cool and dry starting mid-July. Less push and pull. But the Neijing says that warmth comes early, animals come out of hibernation early on this year, which it's kind of the case. Yeah, the frogs came out and then went away again.
we didn't really get any until just the last few days.
Oh yeah, we got them for like a week earlier on. Yeah,
now, but more than most recent years.
yeah.
It does feel like, also in terms of what people have observed at work, of kind of excesses and deficiencies, that there was a kind of initial flourishing that felt very abundant, where growth seemed to proceed extremely quickly, and then a moment of maybe contraction, sort of slowing down of that pace.
Yeah. Back to
It was.
Yeah.
So there was the Mueller report, and then there was Barr. And
Yeah. So, well, you laugh, but so that of course is the pattern also, and as I've said in other times, I anticipate the shift from this push-pull of wood and wind to cool metal in the second half of this year. And these are talking about the climate industry is one of the ways that these transformations come into play. So I anticipate that shift in the political scene as well, of course.
I guess the question is whose metal is going to.
Well, hopefully it's righteousness.
Yeah.
So the metal is really strong this year. Is that what you're saying?
The character of the first half of the year is wind,
When
and the second half is
it's metal.
metal.
Sorry. Yeah.
And it has kind of revenge energy, so where it's, which is not a connotation in this context. It's just that it's the reversal of the extreme. So we will be having this hot cold, which kind of literally generates wind, but also a globe full of cyclones, and politics full of extreme opposition, and maybe, the 20 plus probably Democratic candidates emerging to some narrowing of the field, maybe in July, in any case, narrowing of the focus, and potentially justice oriented, while the climate becomes cool and dry. And that's the character of a G high year, an earth pig year. Yeah.
I might be the only one happy about that. I'm just kidding. No, I was when you first said that it was summer was kind of ending early. I was getting all excited. I'm not such a summer person. Not that I'm not sunny or anything like that. I really like my fall and I really like my winter.
Yeah. So
Anyway,
I'm interested to see what July is like. July and August are like. Whether it's,
I have to go, but thank you all
Yeah.
so very much.
Yeah.
Have a beautiful day.
You too. Bye. So.
Bye. Thank you.
Bob, we didn't hear from you, but glad to see you and to have you with us.
Wasn't anything to say.
All right. Well, keep saying it to yourself, and we'll see you soon.
What was that?
I said, keep saying it to yourself. It was a nonsense joke.
Oh, okay. So it was one of Phil's.
No, it was distinctly, unfortunately, Ian, I think. But nice to have you here, and we'll see you soon or next time.
Yeah, hopefully next week I can come up. The roofers are coming back to finish up all the skylights today, so.
Great. Yeah, be great to have you in the room.
Yeah.
All right. See you guys.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.